Yo, what's going on guys, Arekkz here and welcome back to another Monster Hunter World video. And in this video, I want to give you guys a complete breakdown of the 24-minute gameplay livestream that happened earlier today. Now, I've already uploaded the raw gameplay stream if you guys want to watch it. So if you don't want me talking over the top, do of course bear in mind the other stream has Japanese narration because it was a stream from Capcom Japan. But in this video, I am going to dive in and try and break down as much as possible. This won't be a direct translation word for word, but since this is the same demonstration I saw at E3, then I basically know pretty much everything that's going on, so I can kind of use that to give you guys some context. So if you do enjoy this, then a like would be super appreciated. Any questions, of course, drop them down below. But diving straight in, this is of course where you will start your quest. I mentioned the other day, you don't always start in the same place, the base camp will vary. Now this specific mission is set out to be like a tutorial mission, so we spoke to someone at the base camp to begin with. She's fully voiced. She actually, well, at E3 she spoke in English, this time she spoke in Japanese. She will then tell you what you need to do, and you also saw at the beginning the hunter pulled up the map. Now of course, again, reminder that the entire map is fully open. It is still broken down on the map into kind of sections, so you can use it for callouts, you can let people know where you are, where the monster is, etc. But the actual map itself is fully open, but you do have a physical map you can bring up now. You don't have to rely just on the mini-map that is in the corner. You can actually bring this up and look at it in more detail. But if we now take a look at the actual kind of area we're in so far, so of course, you know, typical things you're used to, you can kind of gather around things, you can of course, you know, pick up herbs, you can fish, you can gather kind of your normal things. This right here is sort of like an example of how the monsters will sort of interact. So that is a great Jagras, and that is an Aptonoth, and it is indeed swallowing its whole. So a lot of monsters in this game will kind of exist and do their own thing, irrespective of your presence. So unlike, say, previous Monster Hunter games, because of course Great Jagras is the main monster, if it was an old Monster Hunter game, then you would walk in the area and it would just target you straight away. But at the moment, you can of course see that you haven't actually presented a threat to it, you haven't attacked it, so it's quite happy to just sort of go about its business. It's just swallowed that thing completely whole, and it's now walking off to, I'm going to assume, digest it, go to its den, whatever. You of course just saw we just passed some honey and just grabbed it as we were going. You can of course grab things like herbs and whatnot on the passing. Do of course bear in mind this is typically where it makes sense. So things like mining, you'll still need to stop and kind of, you know, actually pickaxe things. And of course if there are monsters to carve or things to kind of gather from the ground, that much you will still need to do. But when it comes to actual sort of just general gathering, you can just do that passing. You can of course also hide in bushes, as you can see here. This is an optional stealth mechanic. You don't have to use stealth, but it is an option you can use. And of course, do bear in mind, this is important now. I've seen a lot of people kind of, you know, making comments about, you know, does this make the game easier? It's like, you need to bear in mind that because this is a fully open map, there are no longer loading zones to go anywhere to, like, you know, hide from a monster. So if you're being chased, you can't just sort of exit area 4 and go into area 5 and sit and be safe there for a bit. The monster can chase you all the way around the map. It will break through stuff. So the ability to like hide in bushes and use like the environment like that is now effectively the way that you'll hide. Something you're seeing on screen now, these sort of green flies. Now this is a means to track the monsters. Again, you don't have to use this. You could just walk around the map hoping to find it like a kind of more traditional way. But the way this works is as follows. So you'll see on the ground, you'll see like on the walls and on the kind of on the trees and stuff, different things from the monster. Sometimes there'll be footprints, sometimes there'll be sort of mucus that's just on the trees. And if you interact with enough of these, then your progress bar on the right-hand side will basically level up, and you'll then get to the point, which is what we're seeing right now, where the bugs will automatically track the monster. It's also, you'll notice if you look in the bottom left-hand corner on the mini-map, it is now marked there permanently, so you don't need to throw a paintball on it. It doesn't need to be, you know, the paintball won't wear off or anything like that, but we've now got a marking for the monster. Again, of course, bear in mind in this situation, we are hidden, we're stealth, and what you just saw there is the nuts you can kind of gather around the map. We're actually using the arm cannon we have, and you can fire that to use sound to lure the monster out. So again, at the moment, we aren't really presenting a threat, so it's not really going to focus on attacking us just yet, until, of course, we shoot something in its face. But you can use this to effectively get monsters out of crowded areas. So they are, you know, monsters have a lot more kind of like nuanced movesets. They're a lot more complicated than before, so you don't necessarily want to fight it in a tight cave, especially a big monster like that. So in that situation, using like stones or like nuts to effectively create sound to draw the monster away is a great way to get it into a slightly more advantageous position. Of course, you can see here, if you noticed the scout flies before, the green ones, they went red, and of course the outside of your map is now pulsating red as well. This indicates that you are now in combat. The monster, you know, the attention is on you, so this is of course really important. You just saw up there as well, you're able to shoot things from above and effectively have them drop down. So there's loads of things in the environment you can use. You know, sometimes there are kind of bigger things like boulders, which we'll have a look at later on. But of course, sometimes there are just smaller things like, you know, nuts and stuff, you can just fall down and drop down. You will of course notice damage numbers on the monsters. These can be turned off, but they're actually quite useful because, in truth, you know, if you wanted to kind of work out how much damage you were doing in previous Monster Hunter games, then it involved, you know, spreadsheets and a variety of maths and whatnot. So this time around you can actually see them. They're really small, they're not that intrusive, and to be honest, when you're kind of in the flow of combat, it's very easy to just sort of ignore them and just forget they're there. Now, this right here is an example of the monster food chain. The Great Jagras we saw from earlier, he actually kind of approached the area and came in, and you'll see now that the Anjanath basically switched focus. We were no longer the kind of target at that point. It was like, you know, there's a monster here, and being the dominant predator in this food chain, it then effectively just destroyed the Great Jagras. You can use this to your advantage when you're hunting. If you were, say, if it was your, like, if you were on a quest to hunt a Jagras, you could then lead it to, say, the den of an Anjanath and actually use that to your advantage. But this is definitely something you need to pay attention to, and it's actually going to be something super important to learn when you're playing, because if you know the monster food chains, you know kind of like, you know, what is the dominant or the apex predator, then you can definitely use that to your advantage. Now, while those monsters are fighting out for a second, to call out a few things that are on screen. So, of course, top left-hand corner, things you're used to, there is still a quest timer. You can, of course, see they've got about 20 minutes for this one. It's a demo quest, of course. You have your health, you have your stamina. You will see below that the sharpness gauge is now an actual kind of like meter, as opposed to just like a, you know, a toggle on and off kind of thing, because as you use your weapon, the kind of gauge will gradually deplete, so you get an idea as to when your weapon is going to blunt, which is really useful. And down below that, there are two icons. These are the mantles, which we'll actually kind of like take a look at later on. They're effectively things that you can actually, you know, wear to give you different effects. There's the Ghillie Mantle, which is the one that will allow you to stealth. There are things like Challenger Mantles, Rocksteady Mantles, so we'll speak about them a little bit more later on. They do, of course, seem to have some kind of timer, so you can't just throw them on and off as you want. But if we then look at the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see the ability to track the monster, so you can click in the right stick to effectively enable tracking, or not tracking, sorry, to enable lock-on like you would see in the 3DS version. So if you want to be able to like tap L and snap to the monster to kind of give you easier targeting, then just like on 3DS, that is, of course, present. You'll also see two monster icons down there. So, of course, the one that currently has the heartbeat, the one that we're focusing on, is the Anjanath. But there is also the Great Jagras, the one that we've already seen so far. It hasn't necessarily been killed, it's just been, you know, in a fight with Anjanath. So they are present down there. You do also have, you've seen it a couple of times in the demo, this quick select menu. So in the bottom right corner, you have your default Monster Hunter menu. You hold square to bring it up, and you can, of course, cycle between your items. You can grab, you know, your potions, your stakes, your whetstones, anything like that. They can be accessed from the normal menu, but there is also a quick select menu. So we'll speak a little bit more about that a little bit later on. But first, focusing on the mounting that's happening right now. So you'll see the map itself starts flashing red. This is now your mounting indicator. So prior to that in Monster Hunter, you of course have a bar that appears right in the middle. And of course, you know, when the head starts gnashing and the bar goes red, then you typically hold on. Whereas now, if the white kind of glow around your map, you know, remains white, then it means you're free to attack. You can then stay on the back, and at certain times like this, when the monster's sort of more steady, you can actually use your core weapon. But when the map starts flashing red, that's of course when the monster's trying to throw you off, and you can then, you know, use that as a means to hold on. And you can also reposition whilst you are mounting, so you don't just have to stay in one place. If you do get thrown off, you do also have a grappling hook on your left hand, so you can try and grab yourself back on. Timing is pretty tight on that, but it is, of course, an option. So at this point, there's probably a good chance to sort of indicate just how important it is to be able to use the environment to your advantage, because your map is glowing red. The Anjanath has full attention on you. It's in rage mode. It's got its nostrils out. It's got its wings out. It is pretty angry, and this is the part where it will chase you around the entire map. Like, there are no loading zones, as I said before, so you can't just run from like area 4 to 5 and just hope the Anjanath will leave you alone. Like, all while your map is red, all while it is angry with you, it is going to chase you absolutely everywhere. So in this situation, the hunter's going to try and sort of, you know, climb up a viney wall. It can still chase you up there. If there are areas where you go through a tight corridor and there's like sticks and branches and stuff, it will break through them. Like, it will actually destroy the environment to try and chase you. So there'll actually be times when you can use this to your advantage. There have been times in, say, one of the E3 demos where it actually smashed part of the wall and it revealed sort of like a hidden cave you can crawl into. So whether that's like a, you know, like kind of a hidden zone where you can get cool mining materials, or whether that's just something else. But the point is, you know, you don't have the ability to like exit a zone to hide. So it's incredibly important to be able to use things like bushes to hide in, but do bear in mind, in this state, when it's in rage mode, you couldn't just jump in a bush and have it not see you at all, because monsters also have a sense of smell, so when it's this angry, stuff like that isn't going to be too useful. Of course, up there was an example of the grappling hook. You have that on your right arm, or your left arm even, and you can use that to like grapple onto specific nodes. You can't grapple onto everything, but of course, where you saw those glowing nodes, you can of course go up. So Despite that, and of course in that situation the Anjanath can't grapple, so it kind of goes the long way around, but it does still have attention on you, so it's still going to chase you, like it's going to find like the opportune or the most kind of direct route to sort of pursue you down. So what they're actually trying to do now, this is the part in the demo where they're going to try and switch over from single player to multiplayer. So they're actually going to lead it up to the top, which is where the Rathalos nest is. Now bear in mind the worlds in this, they kind of, they'll vary every time you hunt. So in fact, this demonstration, even though I saw a similar one at E3, it plays out remarkably different every single time I've seen it. So, like the last time I saw it, Anjanath didn't even fight Great Jagras and stuff. But again, here's another demonstration of the hierarchy, the food chain. So while Anjanath is the dominant predator when compared to a Great Jagras, Rathalos is definitely more dominant than the Anjanath. So in this situation, you can actually use that to your advantage. They kind of brought it up here. The Anjanath is actually going to kind of like run away for a bit because, it doesn't really want to get involved with Rathalos, and now our attention is on here. So this is where the developers during the live stream were like, you know what? We're in a situation and we probably should get some help in here. So they're going to fight for a little bit, but they're effectively going to draw to their flare in a second. You get another look at that radial menu there, and the other day some people actually asked the question, are things like shock traps and stuff still present? Because there are environmental shock traps now, because you can kick things like, frogs or flash bombs, but they do still seem to be present. They're in that quick select menu, so that is indeed very, very useful. You can also see some of the moves in the top right-hand corner. Now, I do believe this is basically starts to be like a tutorial mission, something that Monster Hunter has always, lacked on, basically. They've had, like, ways to sort of teach people, but they've never been too good. This is actually a really, really good sort of tutorial flow. The narration from the quest giver, paired with the button combos, paired with loads of things like that, is a really kind of good introduction to the game. So if we do ever get some sort of playable demo ourselves, then I'm going to imagine that is probably what we're going to get. Or maybe this will be like the first mission in the game. Hopefully, for once, they'll actually kind of let you kick off the game without just being like a boring gathering mission. We can do something slightly more exciting. However, jumping back to that for a second, you would of course seen the Hunter fight a flare in the sky. That now opens up the lobby to drop in multiplayer. You can still go into like the hub town, set up a quest and group up there as you always have done. But in this situation, if you start off solo and then like you decided, alright, we're fighting Rathalos, things got a little bit tough, now I need some help. They've called in their friends and they are effectively then going to be able to sort of find the, the drop in multiplayer option. They're going to fly in and they're going to fly in on these little sort of wyverns attached with their grappling hooks. You also saw there the destruction of the environment. That is something that can be used by both hunters and monsters. So there was a dam at the top with like, sticks and debris and stuff holding it back. And the hunter used the bomb to destroy it. Conversely, the Rathalos could have like done a big fire attack and it could have destroyed it as well. So those things aren't just there for you. They're there that, you kind of like need to watch out for them, because while you can use them to your advantage, if you are also factoring in, say, the monster, then it too can kind of change the tide in battle like that. So falling down, drop down, you can of course see now we are in 4 different perspectives. So we've got some really kind of interesting combinations here. We've got a bow user. We also of course got the greatsword user from before. We have a lance user and we also have a hammer user. At some point during the demo, they're going to swap again to a longsword, but for the time being, this is what we're seeing. So you might have seen with the bow there, like a really, really cool shot. So after, your first couple of shots, you have this this option to scrape the ground with your arrow and set it alight, and then you can sort of like fire off that fire arrow. So that's how you saw the bow user do that. But we're actually now moving over to the hammer user, which is a new one for me. I hadn't seen this at E3. So far we've seen greatsword, longsword, heavy bowgun, bow, longsword, and dual blade. We haven't seen hammer. And hammer, a little bit later on, you'll see an incredible move. So a few other things to bear in mind here. Again, the actual, when you're fighting the monster, you do need to kind of bear in mind that hitboxes now are a lot more precise. So even when it kind of came to sort of cutting the tail on things, it's not quite as sort of blocky as before. So you're going to need to, well, to a certain extent, you can actually use that to your advantage, because they're going to be a lot more like nuanced positions to actually place your attacks. But at the same time, it's also going to be a little bit harder to cut things like tails off, because it's just not like a generic like hit in this area and you'll cut the tail off. It's going to be a little bit more kind of focused. So you're going to have to use that to, really pay attention together. Also, another thing, you can still hit your teammates. So for those of you guys that like that aspect of the game, I appreciate it can be a little bit annoying, but it is also funny at the same time. So yes, there is still, like, you won't do damage. If you guys haven't seen or played Monster Hunter before, you can hit your teammates and you can like send them flying, but you won't actually damage them. So you can't kill your teammates. So there's not like friendly fire in that respect, but there is still the kind of fun nature of being able to like, knock your teammates around, which is something that was missing from Monster Hunter Online, the sort of Chinese version as well. So here's a really cool move from the actual hammer. One of the cool things to kind of bear in mind, you won't hear it in this video, but if you watch the other one, the raw gameplay one, you can like really get a sense of like the impact of the hammer. Like it feels like even though I wasn't playing and I didn't of course have like rumble and stuff, you just genuinely get this sense that like you can really feel the hits, and that's something that hasn't always been present. Sometimes, like, I love hammer. I used to main hammer in Freedom Second, in Freedom Unite, and I used it for a while in Cross and Generations. And I've always liked the weapon, but sometimes you find that like the hits, just the kind of hit detection and the way that it actually like feels when you connect with the monster doesn't necessarily feel too sort of weighty. Whereas like when you hear it in this, when you actually like see it properly connect, it like feels like you've got some genuine weight to the hammer. The Greatsword user is now going to go and fly back to the base camp to change some gear. You'll notice, however, they're not going to fly back to the base camp they started at in Area 1. They're instead going to fly back to a different base camp. So on a map, there will be multiple different base camps. So you can use that as like fast travel points if you want to try and get to an area quicker or get to a monster quicker. Also very useful if you carted and want to try and get back before the timer ran out. So that is, of course, an option. But here, they're actually going to swap out their gear. They're going to change from the Greatsword to the Longsword. You will notice there are 15 icons in there. That is not a new weapon. I've seen a lot of people ask about this. The 15th icon is a Kinsect, so I'm going to assume it works very similar to how Monster Hunter Double Cross works, where in Double Cross you can actually pass Kinsects between different glaives. So assuming they're kind of maintaining that system, then that is what the icon is. I know the footage isn't too clear because it's taken from a live stream, but if you look at the Kinsect icon, look at it very closely, you can actually see that is in fact what it is. So there are still only 14 weapons. There's not like a hidden 15th weapon they have yet to reveal. That is what we're getting. You'll also notice there was, of course, the option to change your Palico's gear there as well. Palico is, of course, not present in this hunt because it's a 4-player hunt. And you'll also notice they swapped out the Mantle as well. So that is an option you can, of course, use, you know, different ones. But it seems like, I'm going based on the UI, but it seems like you can only have 2 at one time. So you might want to swap them out depending on what you want. So again, recap, you know, we've had Mantles like the Ghillie one for hiding, we've had like the Challenger one to get the monsters to aggro, there's things like the Rocksteady one to stop you from flinching, so, you know, options like that. So you'll also notice the Longsword user just slid down the hill. If you are on a part where, like, you know, there is a hill, you can of course slide down, you can actually use that to go into an attack, and we'll focus more on that when we actually turn our attention to the hammer user in a little bit. Of course, you'll also see the Longsword still has the spirit gauge you've come to expect, which is, of course, really, really awesome. The Lance user here, we unfortunately don't get to see too much gameplay from it, so, you know, hopefully once we get some more videos, like, further down the line, we can actually get a lot more kind of focus on particular weapons to try and like break things down like that. I'm also going to be doing some more focus videos over the coming sort of days and weeks and whatnot to talk about specific items in the game, because I appreciate trying to talk about everything in like a 24-minute time span over this gameplay. There's a lot of stuff that you're probably going to want me to go a little bit more granular on, so do stay tuned for that stuff. But anyway, yeah, so this is now going to be like focusing a little bit more on the Anjanath, because of course this is their primary kind of objective. They're here to fight Anjanath, and while they did engage with Great Jagras for a little bit, and of course Rathalos, they do still want to try and, you know, complete the quest. Those nuts you just saw there, again, they're the things that kind of, they're essentially your ammo for your wrist launcher, rocket launcher. They're not really a rocket launcher, whatever you want to call it, like kind of the wrist cannon thing. So once I get a name for it, I'll definitely you know, call that out. So this here, this is really cool. That green glowing thing, that's one of those environmental traps I spoke about. That was a frog. They kicked it, and you'll notice that it detonates a few seconds after, and because the Anjanath was nearby, it actually got stuck in it. That can also affect the hunters, so if you kick it and you just don't move, you'll also get shocked, but that is something you want to look out for. Those sort of environmental traps you can use. There's a similar one that's like a flash bomb, or like a flash bug that you can shoot and it'll explode into like a flash bomb. Really, really cool. But this right here, this hammer move, oh my gosh, when I saw that, I literally lost my, yeah, I went crazy. Like you can, so to reiterate what happened there, he slid down the hill whilst charging his hammer and jumped into what was effectively a cartwheel style attack. So that dealt mounting damage because of course he was able to mount from that, but like in itself it just looks absolutely incredible. So while things like styles are not coming back, styles and arts, there are still going to be some new moves for all the weapons. You might have seen in the Greatsword gameplay there's sort of like a bodge and like a different sort of upswing as well. So there are going to be new moves to learn. There are going to be like, you know, new things you have to like consider, and to a certain extent some of these moves, like that crazy hammer one, could be likened to a bit of an art. Like it's not an actual like hunter art, but the way they're still, you know, flashy and they do some like relatively good damage, and of course they are like pretty over the top, then there's still like that kind of component to it. So I don't necessarily think we're going to go from like having styles back to like super basic like combat. There will still be some cool new moves that we can, you know, work with. So something else you might have just seen there as well on the bottom of the screen, you could of course use callouts for your teammates. So of course if you are communicating with people, then of course you can use them to, you know, like put out messages, and of course, you know, like call out as well. You could also ping the map as you always have done. So if you know where the monster is and you want to kind of like help your team out, then you can do so. The smaller monsters, is worth bearing in mind, they are, again, more intelligent than before. They're not just going to kind of like sit there and mindlessly attack you. They too will have their own sort of agenda and their kind of existence in the world. They can also be a bit of a pain because while, say, like if you're hiding in a bush and a bigger monster doesn't necessarily always see you, the smaller monsters sometimes will. They might be able to like smell you out, so they can, in certain situations, almost sort of bait you up. Heavy bowgun here looks incredibly awesome. It looks a lot more like sort of third-person shooter style aimings. Something like, again, I kind of made a comparison to sort of ripping a turret off in Halo or using something like you know, like a machine gun in Gears of War. So it definitely has that like feel to it. You can move and shoot with it, but of course you're still a little bit slower. Same thing goes for like using healing items and stuff when you're, you know, when you're moving. You can do it, but it is again a little bit slower. That right there was another environmental trap. There were some like, you know, vines and nets above, so they used that. They shot it down, landed on top of the monster, and it acts again as a little trap. And of course, the longsword here showing off some really awesome new moves. There is a really cool move that the user keeps on like whiffing. There seems to be this really cool final move where it effectively like stabs the monster after the like the main combo, and it seems to it sounds like it does a lot of damage. And the way that they kind of like, you know, in the commentary they kept on sort of like sighing every time they missed it. It sounds like it's kind of one of those things that you definitely want to hit, but given it's got a pretty good setup, like a pretty long setup, it goes at the end of the combo, then it's definitely like a little bit harder to land. But again, kind of going to sort of illustrate that weapons do have new moves, so there are still going to be some new things to learn. Also, it's really kind of cool that I mentioned before how you have the button prompts in the corner. Like, they're not things that I would personally want there all the time, but in the context of, say, a tutorial mission, again, to kind of get people into the game, then it is very cool to be able to like have those present there so people can like work out some of the like moves and combos. Because if you guys cast your mind back to, say, when I did my weapon tutorials in, you know, 4 Ultimate or Double Cross or just Cross in general, then there are like moves that sometimes aren't necessarily explained too well, or sometimes they'll kind of give you the basics like in the sort of Hunter's Log, but they won't give you everything. So the ability to have those kind of button inputs is going to be, you know, incredibly useful. But hopefully it's something you can like turn off, or again, it will only be present in, you know, one of those missions. So monster now is going to sleep. Again, if you guys haven't played Monster Hunter before, then if you get the monster into a weakened state and it starts limping, it will then try and go back to where it deems its nest to be, and it will try and sleep there to, you know, recover a little bit of health. And assuming it kind of still works like Monster Hunter always has, then dealing damage to a sleeping monster, if you do it with weapons like Blade Master weapons, it will deal double damage. If you do it with items like bombs and stuff, then you're dealing triple damage. So an incredibly good way to dish out some damage. And of course, if you can then pair it with things like sleep type weapons, then that is really cool. In fact, talking about different types of weapons, we can of course see on the lance, and I think also the longsword, they appear to have like a thunder element on them, because you can of course see every single time they land an attack, you get this sort of thundery spark coming out as well. So, you know, while that again is a staple and I kind of assumed that was going to return anyway, it's quite nice to see like elemental weapons, you know, in action. Another thing you might notice as well, the longsword user actually has a mantle on right now. Now this is a different one to the one that I've seen before. Not entirely sure what it does from the voiceover, from what I can kind of like gather and translate. It sounded like it had some kind of link to sort of like a damage increase, so it may well be some sort of like attack up mantle. Of course, the ones that we've seen, you know, I mentioned already, like the Challenger one typically has like black scales on it, so it looks similar to the one we're seeing here, but not quite the same. And of course, the Ghillie one is very obviously, you know, it's like leaves all over it, but this one does look quite different to what I've seen before, so it could well be, I need to kind of go back and double check and try and get the actual translation for it, but it seems like it may well be tied to damage increase. But for the time being, that is pretty much it. That rounds out the hunt. That is them kind of, you know, they're completing the mission. They're obviously carving now, so you can see, you know, carving, as it always has done, you still need to like stay still and, you know, complete it. So that much isn't being, you know, like you're not going to be able to run past and just grab parts from the monster. So things like that, the gathering kind of stuff does, of course, you know, like limit it where it makes sense. But anyway, for the time being, that was a kind of quick breakdown of the gameplay itself. That's me trying to sort of go over as much as possible. Hopefully you guys found it useful. Again, if you do want to watch it raw without me talking over the top, I will leave a link to the one I uploaded a little bit earlier today. And again, I will be following up over the coming days and weeks and whatnot with some more kind of granular videos on specific aspects of the game. So if there are things you want to know about, whether it be, you know, gear, the way you track, or some of the items, or some of the mantles, or like anything in particular, if there's something you want to know, then I'll be doing some more specific videos on those sorts of things. So do stay tuned for them. Lots more Monster Hunter World coverage coming soon. Hopefully at some point Capcom will release like a higher resolution version of this, because of course this was taken from a live stream, so quality wasn't perfect, but at least we've kind of gone from a position whereby we didn't have any gameplay before, we just had the trailer, to now actually seeing full gameplay, end-to-end, a nice hunt. Looks really awesome. Hopefully any of you guys that were kind of slightly concerned before are now put at ease, because this is incredibly awesome. Anyway, thank you for watching, take it easy, catch you next time, peace out.